Chapter 8 begins a second narrative and is followed by the second discourse, the Missionary Discourse. In chapter 8's narrative, Jesus heals a leper, a centurion's servant, and people at Peter's house, including Peter's mother-in-law. These healings are followed by a description of a few people who want to closely follow Jesus but choose not to. Jesus calming a storm and an exorcism. The theme of Jesus as Lord over illness, people, and nature bind these events together and points to his divinity. The miraculous healing of the leper not only reveals Jesus' divinity, but also affirms a new kind of holiness that Jesus is ushering in. Jesus' holiness is greater than the impurity and illness that Jesus encountered in his meeting with the leper. Jesus also will display his unique kind of holiness by mingling with sinners without contracting their sin. Since Jesus' holiness is more powerful than the contagion of sin, as his holiness is more powerful than the contagion of leprosy, this holiness of encountering that which is impure and sinful and transforming the impure and sinful into purity and holiness contrasts with the holiness of the Pharisees. The Pharisees grounded their understanding of holiness in the Old Testament's provisional holiness, especially as the law developed in response to Israel's sins. Old Testament holiness tended to define holiness as separation from what is impure and sinful. This stage of holiness was one of the beginning stages in salvation history. Ever respectful of our free will and wanting to save us gradually, God saves us through stages. A beginning stage in being moral and growing in holiness entails being separated from bad influence, being separated from symbols and reminders of death and destruction, such as the loss of blood, while being surrounded by life-affirming symbols. The Jerusalem temple, understood as God's earthly home, was a place where holiness, as separation, was practiced even more intensely. Those suffering from recent discharges of blood or semen were not permitted in the temple, the home of God, the author of life, blood, and semen. Outside of the body, blood and semen die, and in this state are signs not of life, who God is, but of death. Leviticus 15. The Pharisees, as Hahn explains, expanded the biblical teachings on the holiness of the temple by applying holiness regulations to the home and daily life. Thus, holiness defined by separation was evident in the Pharisees' daily life and even in their name. The name Pharisee comes from the Hebrew word perushim, which means separated ones. Instead of separating himself from what is impure and sinful, Jesus actively sought those who were impure and sinful to heal and restore them by his mercy. Jesus powerfully demonstrates this higher form morality by deliberately eating with those considered as outcasts, with the tax collectors and public sinners. Jesus also shows forth his redeeming power by healing a woman whom blood was flowing out. Jesus teaches us that the height of holiness is not about separating ourselves from that which is considered bad and impure, but rather in his life going out to cleanse, elevate, and redeem that which is impure. Since by baptism, Christians have been incorporated into the life of Jesus, there to participate in the merciful holiness of Jesus, which is outgoing and inclusive. However, since baptism does not render one completely holy, this new merciful kind of holiness is to be lived with caution in this, what Benedict XVI has named a painful between state. The state of experiencing moments of life in Jesus and moments of being caught up by weaknesses and aspects of our fallen natures that still need to be healed by Jesus. This means that sometimes, aware of our fallen nature, disciples of Jesus are to honestly acknowledge to themselves that since we are still beginners in the life and holiness, we also, at times, need to separate ourselves from others, since, unlike Jesus, who always healed and elevated all he encountered, we might adopt the bad ways of thinking and acting of those we encounter. At the same time, we also should pray for the grace to take steps forward where we can become more outgoing, less fearful, as we allow the life of Jesus to flow through us, healing those whom we encounter. In the process of associating with us in our illness, both physical and spiritual, Jesus, as explained in Matthew, fulfills Isaiah's suffering servant prophecy. According to Isaiah, he takes upon himself our infirmity and our diseases. As Hahn comments, by healing the sick and the possessed, Jesus fulfills this prophecy in a preliminary manner. Upon the cross, when Jesus takes upon himself our sins while remaining sinless, he definitively fulfills the suffering servant prophecy. In the midst of healing people and stilling a storm at sea, all signs pointing to his divinity, Jesus identifies with the Son of Man who has nowhere to lay his head. The Son of Man refers to the divine being who looks like a son of man, coming on the clouds of heaven, singling a divine being, and is presented to the Ancient of Days, a title for God, and given an eternal kingdom that shall not be destroyed. Daniel 7:13-14. Jesus fulfills this prophecy as fully human and fully divine in the one divine person who sacramentally establishes the heavenly kingdom. The visible can sacramentally point to the invisible heavenly reality that will at the end of time fully transform earthly reality into a new heaven and a new earth. Revelation 21:1. Jesus calming the storm at sea may also have the added significance, comments Hahn, as a parallel to Jonah, who also experienced a storm at sea. But unlike Jonah, who had no power over the forces of the sea, Jesus calms the sea. Another similar parallel, which Jesus far surpasses, is King Solomon as an exorcist. Solomon in the Book of Wisdom is identified as having powers of spirits, Wisdom 7:20. Jewish tradition, as recorded by Josephus, provides further details of Solomon's power over spirits. I quote, God also enabled him to learn that skill which expels demons, which is a science useful and sanative to men. He composed such incantations also by which distempers are alleviated, and he left behind him the manner of using exorcisms by which they drive away demons, so that they never return. And this method of cure is of great force unto this day. Jesus, as someone greater than Solomon, Matthew 12:42, does not use incantations and specific prayers formulated by exorcisms, but rather casts the demons out by his own power. Since the Greek word for exorcism, as Hahn notes, is exorkisein, Jesus does not exorcise demons with a set of established prayers, but simply casts, ex ballo, them out.